Dramatic video shows the moment that those 4 Americans from South Carolina were kidnapped shortly after crossing into Mexico in what authorities have called a case of mistaken identity. We want to warn you that the video we are about to show you is graphic and disturbing. You can see men in bulletproof vests brandishing long guns, violently shoving the Americans into the back of a pickup. A woman shoved into the flatbed while the bodies of 2 others appear limp and dragged in beside her. The minivan they were traveling in riddled with bullet holes. One of the windows shot out. Family members have identified the 4 as Latavia McGee, her cousin Shaeed Woodward, seen here, and their friends Zindel Brown and Eric James Williams. We don't know which of the victims have been killed at this time. Martha, again, we don't know who has been killed. We know, reportedly, according to the Associated Press, it was an individual going for a tummy tuck. And that individual's mother saying she got a call saying we're 15 minutes away from the procedure, and then she just never heard back.
It's a terrifying story. It's indicative of what's going on at the border, how incredibly dangerous it is. It really makes you wonder. I think we're going to hear from Ned Price at the Department of State soon, whether or not he's going to say, that they recommend that nobody go south of the border right now. I mean, you look at these other video that we have today of these chases that are going on, human traffickers dragging people out. There's so much danger to human beings in this entire area. And what I'm looking for this afternoon, we're going to hear from the White House at 1:30, is what's the level of outrage coming from the White House over this? What are they going to say to the president of Mexico about how this will be dealt with? And, Bill Barr, I know we have some sound from what he said. This is the larger picture. What is the role of U.S. Special Forces, of the Coast Guard, of American military? Because our people are being injured because of the fact that there's no control from the Mexican government over their own country. The cartels are running the entire country. And so what position does that put us in as a nation north of the border in terms of what we have to do to protect our own people?
Now let's take a moment and listen to those remarks from former AG Bill Barr. Here you go.
Well, they are terrorists. I think there's another hostage, and that's the Mexican government. The Mexican government is being held hostage by tens of thousands of paramilitary members of terrorist organizations that effectively control Mexico. It's pretty close at this stage to a failed narco state. The government has no will, and it doesn't have the ability to deal with the cartels. And they are sitting next door, producing mountains of poisonous drugs and killing over 100,000 Americans a year. So we are sustaining the same damage as we would in a major war from these groups operating right beyond our reach.
Emily, he went on to say that they should be compared to ISIS. Robert O'Brien, former national security advisor, earlier said they behead, they torture. Michael Walls saying they killed 50 Mexican troops in a battle. I mean, it's like the power of a nation state. They have billions and billions of dollars. It seems like that's a logical conclusion. I hope we hear that from Ned Price.
That's right. And the only ideological difference is that here it's the worship of money. Right now, the Sinaloa cartel alone makes an estimated between $3 and $39 billion annually just off of the drug trade, in part because the other cartels went the way of the human smuggling income source as well, which those estimates range up to $13 billion annually. It's difficult to truly grasp that amount of money and that level of riches, essentially, that are being trafficked. And the whole point is that there is nothing that will stop those cartels from continuing to traffic in that amount of income, right? I mean, think about the feeling of $1 between you and your business. This is unable for them to in any way diminish their sources of income, because it will be the depletion of that entire, essentially, small micro governments within the larger state. I appreciate everything that AG Barr said, because he's absolutely on the money. The biggest hostage is the Mexican government and ours, who refuses to do anything. And frankly, the biggest ally that these transnational narco cartels have is our government for doing nothing to stop it. I was just in Mexico last weekend, and I wonder what other Americans were there during that weekend that didn't have the safe trip that I did, that didn't enjoy the seamless experience that I did. It's frightening, these poor Americans. And I know one of them mentioned, a relative reported that she was sort of concerned about her safety before she went, not just about the medical procedure, but frankly about the safety there in Mexico itself. And unfortunately, her greatest fears were realized.
Wow. Kevin, yesterday the White House reacted to this, of course, before the news of the casualties. But let's take a listen to what Karine Jean-Pierre said on this.
We are closely following the assault and kidnapping of 4 U.S. citizens in Matamoros, Mexico. These sorts of attacks are unacceptable. Our thoughts are with the families of these individuals, and we stand ready to provide all appropriate consular assistance. U.S. law enforcement is in touch with Mexican law enforcement. The Departments of State and Homeland Security are also coordinating with Mexican authorities, and we will continue to coordinate with Mexico and push them to bring those responsible to justice. And again, our hearts are with the families.
Kevin, Bill Barr questioning whether that response was adequate. It didn't seem to me to have the appropriate level of outrage when it comes to American hostages.
Yeah, Kaylee, it's an important point, and I think what Martha said earlier is we need to see that outrage from this administration. Americans are dying at that border in Mexico when they travel as tourists, seeking medical treatment as this individual did. And we are funding the border in a rapid clip, more than we have in the past, a 12% increase over last year. 300 more border agents, but that's certainly not enough. We need to build on what the Trump administration did in terms of shining a light on the border and build on some of the successes we saw during that time. I'm a Democrat on this panel saying some of the things that the previous administration did that you were a part of were critically important. We need to build on that and hope that Republicans meet us at that border with President Biden in pushing for increasing fundings to DHS and Border Patrol.
Yeah, Michelle, so what do you think the administration should do on this? I mean, for instance, if someone was vacationing abroad in, let's say, Middle Eastern country, I assume we would have taken some level of action. I'm not suggesting militarily, but Michael Wall's saying here, look, I'm not saying U.S. military, but I'm saying drones, for instance. There's other technology we can use if we bring in the U.S. military to assist law enforcement.
There is so much more that can be done. I appreciate that everyone wants to see outrage today from the White House. I want to see action. I want to see action more than I want to see outrage. Of course, I agree. We should all be outraged. I am. I remember 2019, there was a Mormon family that lived just over the border from Arizona. And they were in 2 vans going to a wedding, and 8 of them were killed and burned in the car, including 6 children. Within 3 months, the NFL was playing a game in Mexico City later in November. And I thought, why are they still playing this game? Why aren't we making a statement and saying, you know what? No more NFL games in Mexico City until you guys clean up your act and stop killing Americans. I do think we should maybe even go a step further. Look, I like freedom. And if people want to go travel to Mexico as you did and they feel they can do it safely, that's wonderful. But we should really discourage that and put a dent in the tourist industry down there. Put a dent in the way that Americans are sending so much money to Mexico when that government, which, as you've all echoed, is a serious hostage to the cartels. And I think a willing hostage. There's so much money to be shared.
A hostage suggests they're helpless. I understand the comparison, Martha, but they're not helpless.
Right.
Because when President Trump was in the White House, he threatened tariffs, and in response got 6,000 Mexican troops on the southern border of Mexico. They're not helpless.
Yeah, well, we just had a trial in New York of the top law enforcement official in the Mexican government who was getting millions of dollars from these cartels. So there's a lot of overlap here. There's a ton of corruption. And I do think we have to question what our own military response might be, and also whether or not we're going to say, that tourism is not something that we're not going to put those tourism dollars into this country until they clean up their act. It's not safe. I mean, it's the one place when my kids went to go on spring break, it was the one place that I said absolutely not to.
Right.
You're not going. Yeah. It's not safe.
Yeah, a lot of questions for Ned Price at the State Department and for Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House.